Hey guys, alright, we are back with Potential History. We're gonna just dive right into the German tank meme part dos. This time I think this is where the memery shall be, because in the last one it was just kind of setting up the context, I think, if I'm remembering right. Been a few days. I'm forgetful. Anyways, yeah. German tank meme part 2, let's just dive right in.
Thoroughly wonderful show from the world-famous Dancing Poodles. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have three fine young men from
Germany.
They're coming. Hold on, they're coming. Here they are.
Panzerwaffe.
Panzerwaffen? Oh, well. I mean, it looks cool. It looks like it works. I don't know. I couldn't
This
even
video is
choose.
sponsored by Retail Me Not. More on that in a minute. So this is part 2 to my previous German tank video, where I left off talking about the production methods that slowed the number of tanks available on the battlefield. These changes became the hallmark of the next era of German tanks, the Gen 3s, which are what most people think about when discussing German tanks, the Tiger, Panther, Tiger Aus B, or Tiger II. These tanks see Germany shift from an emphasis on speedy, maneuverable tanks to thick boys with big dick energy. The Panther was thrown into production very quickly as response to Soviet tanks. It suffered in its early days from mechanical issues due to a very short development period, though. The Tiger I had been in development before the war, with the initial design being proposed in 1935 for a large breakthrough tank, that would later grow from a first proposed 30-ton design to a 57-ton in the final Alfs E variant. These tanks would have some teething problems, but in their later variants, the reliability issues would be addressed, although not completely fixed, with some of these late war problems being detailed in the post-war French Panther report.
Final drive.
The Tiger II was the final fielded tank model, and was the pinnacle of German heavy tank design, showing up very late in the war with very few models being made, and often falling victim to fuel shortages, causing them to be abandoned. In recent years, a second look has been taken at these tanks, showing that in a defensive position, the guns and armor that they had made them excellent vehicles, but due to the complexity of their designs and reliability issues, they weren't completely all that they were made up to be. There's a really interesting talk by John Parshall online where he explains the different approaches to manufacture between the different tanks. And he highlights the difference between the low-cost, few-model long-run system of the Allies and the high-cost, multiple-model, few-run system of the Germans. And this is what I was getting to with the multiple variant issue earlier. He mentions that when going through the Tiger reference Bible, there were enough changes made during the production cycle that on average every 6th tank was in some way different than the previous ones.
That's a logistical nightmare. How the who has the genius idea of letting that be a thing?
And as I said, most of these were smaller changes that didn't change much about the overall.
During the time it was being produced, the Tiger I underwent many changes, both minor and major. This evolution was a result of a number of different factors, including revised specifications, feedback from the field, and material shortages. Listed here are some of the major changes that occurred after the first Tigers were delivered in August of 1942.
Performance of the vehicle,
Holy
such
shit.
as the repositioning of the fume vent on the Tiger I, with bigger changes such as upgrades from an HL210 to an HL230 being less common. But it shows how often changes to the design were made that would overall slow down the production process, causing fewer units to be produced that rarely make any sweeping positive changes to the capability of the vehicle that redesigning more important parts such as the gun or the power system would have. And these are the changes that you see made in major increments in the Allied factories.
When the Germans are often making new designs from scratch when these types of upgrades are needed.
That kept older designs relevant. Despite this though, Gen 3 German tanks, when implemented correctly, did perform quite well on the battlefield, which makes sense with them having very powerful guns being used mostly on the defensive. However, because they are on the defensive, kill counts for German tanks are very difficult to reliably track, and they have most likely been inflated over the years. The most obvious symptom of this is the near hero worship of German tank aces and their kill counts that aren't based on anything very substantial. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this image before on some sort of forum or newsfeed, and you might have wondered for these big claims being made where these numbers came from. And the answer is, frankly, very unreliable places. German tank ace kill numbers come from two main places: claims from the crews themselves in memoirs or field reports, or propaganda pieces from the time shown to the general public in Germany to create a continued hope for the war effort. And it should go without saying that neither of these are very reliable sources for numbers.
No.
Memoirs are troublesome in general just because they're often not sourced or poorly sourced and are very open to personal bias, and the propaganda newsreels are exactly that, propaganda. The Germans themselves in their reports on Soviet tank losses were aware that their tank crews overestimated kills, with many of them able to be repaired once knocked out, or only being rendered inactive for that engagement, able to be put back into the fight once the particular battle was over, and often reduced the number of kill claims by 35 to 50% to get more accurate readings on their guessings of remaining Soviet tanks. There's a really well-sourced article down in the description going into detail on this, coming to the conclusion that basically ace kill claims are nearly impossible to verify and shouldn't be taken too seriously. In a discussion on them,
or maybe you just reduce it by 35 to 50%. Maybe that'd be more accurate, or maybe even more.
Really doesn't go anywhere. But that's not to say that German tanks didn't kill in favorable ratios, especially late in the war, as being on the defensive would suit that very well. Germany closed the war in an interesting spot, as they had a few tank designs that they were working on that didn't get past the trial phases before they were utterly destroyed at the end, including the super heavy Maus, an E-100, along with a whole new line of standard Panzers that would replace the current line of tanks with different classifications of models that would share as many parts as possible to simplify production and repair. The Maus had 2 prototypes completed that the Germans destroyed before the Soviets could get to them, with one still surviving made up of the turret of one and the hull of another. The E-100 had one prototype that wasn't yet completed, that was found by the British at the end of the war, taken back to Great Britain and later dismantled. A lot of people think that these super heavy vehicles, had they gone into production and seen action, would have been very successful due to the two-dimensional look at vehicles that various tank games have promoted, with the idea that more armor and a bigger gun in a vacuum means a better design. But both of these tanks, that could have only been made in small numbers, would make very big targets on the battlefield that, although hard to punch through, would be slow, poorly maneuverable targets for things like fighter bombers, or large caliber artillery, or even infantry if one of these large tanks was out unsupported, and probably would not have made really any difference in the grand scheme of the war. Sizing up these large behemoths, the pinnacle of German tank production as it were, really gets me to my final point. The biggest criticism that German tanks get is that the Gen 3 tanks, although impressive, should have been ignored in favor of producing more Panzer IVs or other vehicles that would have been made in higher numbers to play the same production game that the Allies were. The issue is that Germany was not set up in any way to play the numbers game. Even if you focused more on Panzer IVs, the fuel and manpower shortages would still curtail the numbers of them that you could have deployed at the cost of less capability from the vehicle that you send out. Yes, the German Gen 3 tanks are overcomplicated. They were really like taking a nice sports car to a demolition derby. But although it wasn't the best strategy, it was the best option out of a list of bad ones in the situation that Germany had backed itself into. And I know I sound like a broken record at this point, with all the videos that I've made about this, but by the time this last generation of tanks makes it to the field, Germany is in an economic war that it can't win. So although the loss of one tank is a huge loss to the Germans compared to the loss of one tank for the Allies, it's hoped that it can take out enough Allied ones before it's destroyed to make it worth it, by it being the best thing that it can be. Now, the reliability issues sort of fly in the face of this, but the things that would have resolved these issues, such as engine development and stronger tooling, take time to create, time that Germany didn't have. So the option they went with at the end of the war, although vastly different from what they wanted going into the war with fast tanks for maneuver, was the best option they had left to go with out of a need for more performance out of every vehicle, pushing them towards the only solution they could economically afford that was the best of a bad situation. Now, as you can imagine, these tanks were not cheap, but the Germans were stuck paying full price because they had no other option.
The music.
When it comes to your own purchases, that doesn't have to be the case.
Oh, you mother, you sneaky bugger. All right, so that looks like it's the end. Okay. Ooh. Again, this not feel as memey as the other tank meme videos. This one felt more as him course correcting the misconceptions around German tanks, which all well and good, right? And understandably, so that's something that needs to be done. There is definitely still, now it's gotten better, but this is still the internet, and so the German tanks are still very mythicized. Which, I mean, they are, when they performed the way they needed to, they were good fucking tanks. But more often than not, it would seem that they did not perform the way that they were needed to. And then, of course, their production was just production hell. They couldn't produce the numbers that should have been produced because of the way that the German production system was set up at this time. which was honestly very inefficient, which is weird because isn't the German stereotype is that they're pretty efficient people? Anyways, yeah, this was more, not really memey, but more about the misconceptions on German tanks and their faults and whatnot, and the production cycle of German tanks, which I still enjoyed. So anyways, that was Potential History's German Tank Meme Part 2. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Leave a suggestion down below for what you want to see me react to next, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.